Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to Thanissara, a very special guest. My name is Asaf. I'm teaching it as part of the Tovana organization that Ilan will shortly talk about for a bit. I will just lay out a bit about the meeting, and then I'll hand it over to Ilan and then Thanissara. So very happy to have this meeting today. Ilan will we'll talk a bit about have the invitation for talking about Tovana and about his connection with Thanissara for many years. And then I'll hand it out to Thanissara to guide us with a meditation, and then a short introduction for this meeting, and we'll go into more of an interview and time for questions. And this whole talk today is regarding what is happening in our um, region in Israel, Palestine, and the war, and bringing Dharma to the experience. Well, noticing also that some of us are practitioners and some of us maybe are not practitioners, but the Dharma is actually open for all, so it doesn't matter so much where do we come from. So to bring some wisdom and compassion to our situation. So thank you for joining, and I move it on to Ilan. Thank you. Ilan, a teacher in Tovana for many years and establishing the Dharma in Israel for many years. So thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Asaf, and thank you, Thanissara. It's so good to see you here again. I noticed that we only see you at times of trouble, so I don't know, we have to relate to this, in the future. So I'll say just a few words in Hebrew and then I'll introduce you. אז המפגש במסגרת תובנה, מי שלא מכיר, אני מניח שלא הרבה לא מכירים, אבל בכל אופן תובנה בחודשים האחרונים, במיוחד מאז שפרצו כאן האירועים, ועוד לפני כן, עוד בעצם מזמן הקורונה, מסיעה הרבה מאוד פעילות של אונליין, הרבה מפגשי אונליין עם מורים ומורות, מורי דרמה מהארץ וגם מהעולם, כדי באמת לספק מסגרת תומכת ויציבות בתרגול תמיד, אבל כמובן שבזמנים של קושי. המפגשים מתקיימים ללא דמי הרשמה וללא עלות, וכולכם וכולכן כמובן מוזמנים ומוזמנות לתמוך בתובנה ולאפשר את המשך הפעילות הזו. So again, I'm very pleased, very happy to host Thanissara here. Thanissara and Kitisaro, who's not here with us now, have been really beloved Dharma friends and teachers. As Thanissara said before, there were many times in Israel teaching, have many yogis who really loved them and attended the many retreats over the years. Thanissara and Kitisaro were monastics for I think 15 years or so. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah.
12 years for me, and he was 15 years.
Yeah. Okay. In the Thai forest tradition, disciples of Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Sumedho, and after so many years, disrobed and joined together by the power of love, and became a married couple many years now. And I'm very pleased to try and see how can you shed some light into this troubled times that we experiencing here. last time we were in touch, I invited Thanissara to contribute to an article to a special issue of our magazine of Buddhism in Israel, relating to the judicial reform. Who remembers now, that we had this thing before? And now we are very troubled, and many yogis and even people who don't practice regularly try and see maybe we can really find some way of relating to the events, to the war, that the turmoil that we find ourselves here. And just to say that I read a very interesting article by Biko Bodhi about war and peace, a Buddhist perspective, and just want to quote a few words which are really puzzling, I think. And he says at the end of this his article, like a conclusion, it seems to me that the ethics of early Buddhism simply do not cover all the predicaments of the human situation, dealing with ethics, dealing with nonviolence, dealing with questions that people ask when we find ourselves in such turmoil and facing all the atrocities of war, life, death. And he says the complexity of the human condition inevitably presents us with circumstances where moral obligations run at cross currents many times. So I think these are big questions, really big questions, and again, I thank you for this opportunity to try and reflect. I assume together, Asaf will lead the discussion later. I'll join in later on. And again, I really appreciate you coming here and sharing with us your wisdom and experience, and mainly meeting you, after all this time, all these retreats, long time friendship, Dharma friendship, and then, personal as well. So I'm really happy to see you and host you here again.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks so much, Ilan. Thank you so much. It's so lovely to see you. And I also have a memory when you came to our small Dharma Center in KwaZulu-Natal on the foothills of the Drakensberg in KwaZulu in South Africa, and did a month retreat there with Avi and Alon, I think. Yes, many years ago. That was a different world, and now we're in this world. And yeah, in free fall. So I'm really happy to be here. Delighted to connect with Tovana. It's really, what's happening is very much in my heart and in my nervous system and in my dreams, and so I feel the heartbreak very profoundly, and the conundrum, as you say. We have guidelines by the Dharma, but to apply the medicine of the Dharma to time and place. I feel my teacher, Ajahn Chah, this was one of the core of his transmissions, was how do we take these profound teachings and themes and practices and apply it to time and place? And that allows for fluidity and agility. There's not prescription on page so-and-so. We have to look into our own wise, listening and connecting that with the premise of compassion, and to understand that there is always a way, even when it feels like there isn't a way. But maybe we don't know exactly what that looks like right now. But we can hold a light for that. Even in the Buddha's life, at a certain point, he knew there was another way to find, but he didn't know what it was, and that precipitated his awakening. So while it looks terrible, while it looks like all ways are blocked, I know there's a lot of the meme going around of no choice in Israeli society. So I would really like to explore that and finding the choice, finding the choice we can. So the Dharma gives us that potential and possibility. But yes, I believe that it would be helpful to start as Asaf has invited with some quiet time. So let's just do that for a short while. And taking a few moments, I'm sure your nervous system's possibly like mine, pretty frazzled, very heightened activation. So the practice of grounding, slowing down, soothing and calming, I find this really profound foundational practice of being with the first foundations of breath within the body as a really, really helpful way to ground ourselves, of course. So for myself, I actually find, even though I've been meditating and I think for over 5 decades, I always find that actually starting in a really simple core way of just even touching 5 fingers and a thumb, well, 4 fingers and a thumb, as I take 5 slow, deep, resourcing breaths. So if that's helpful, to slow the breath, to moderate the breath, and deepen each inhalation, suffusing breath and awareness through your whole body, through the brain, the hair, down through the torso, through the pelvic area, arms, legs, hands, feet. So that this breath energy suffuses the whole body on the inhalation and on the exhalation, just also lengthening the breath. And that invitation, the word in the sutta, Anapana, the breath sutta, Patinissaga, this last stage of the practice, means to hand back, to give back to the Dharma, what we're holding, what we don't need to hold right now, to let it be released in the body on the out breaths. So let's take 5 resourcing, deep, slow breaths, feeling the ground beneath us, touching earth, calling on the protections of the Dhamma, the ancient stream of the awakening to be present for us in however we understand that, calling on the earth, as the Buddha did on the night of his enlightenment, to witness, to be present, the earth that feels all things, this ancient mother. It doesn't hold names for any partition of land around her great sacred web of life, but includes all. So let's just breathe with earth, breathe with the stream of awakening, breathe with the Dharma protectors, ground, arrive, slow down, and be present in our heart to how we are here and now. Remembering we can come back to these 5 or even more slower, deeper breaths through this session. We start to feel activated at this time in particular, with all that's hitting our nervous system, all that's being triggered on the layers of trauma. From the fear, from the violence, from the overwhelm, from the enormity of what's unfolding, keeping it simple, keeping it grounded, returning to what we can know. Soothing, calming, grounding, holding compassion, holding courage. And the awakened ones of old, from the ancestors, from the earth, from the guardian protectors. Bhavantu Sabha Mangalang Rakantu Sabha Devata Sabha Buddha Bhavena Satasoti Bhavantu Te. Bhavantu Sabha Mangalang Rakantu Sabha Devata Sabha Dhamma Bhavena Satasoti Bhavantu Te. Bhavantu Sabha Mangalang Rakantu Sabha Devata Sabha Sangha Bhavena Sati Sati Bhavantu Te. Holding the blessings of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Remembering the timeless nature of this deathless heart, awareness, presence, within which world systems arise and pass, as does each breath, within which all things are resident to be known intimately, be touched with awareness, to be healed, to be liberated, to be investigated, to be known, to be wise discernment, to be held with compassion. Which means even if we don't feel compassion, and sometimes we don't, we can have compassion for not feeling compassion. Awareness can hold it all, boundaryless, timeless, deathless. It's core of the heart. Holding this core to be present at these times, aligned with this great stream through eons of awakening, all beings, all realms, all places, all times. And lift the frequency of earth at this moment through our practice, combined with this sharing of blessings. Thank you, dear friends. So as we go through this time together, to keep remembering to stay present, as is our practice, in our embodied awareness, moving the ground, taking some breaths to steady, to calm. So I think the unfolding is for me to say a few words. The brief I got was the impact for me personally, I think. Is that right, Asaf? And then you will guide us onwards.
Yes, so maybe one something I would like to ask is being kind to our disability of English, us Israelis, and keeping it to a bit of a simple English as you can. So I think sometimes British accent is hard for us, so we can all understand. And yeah, and we will just have asked you if you can start more on a personal level and whatever you have to bring, and from there we'll move on to more of an interview. And if anybody from the crowd has something to ask, so you can just write your questions in the chat. I'll try to bring them up as I can. It can be in English or in Hebrew. English is easier for Thanissara, but I can bring also the Hebrew. And of course, Ilan as well is invited to, if you wish to add some things from time to time. So it's yours, Thanissara.
Thank you. Well, I think first of all, I really want to just hold together that this is such a huge moment, and to express my deep sorrow that you find yourselves in this moment, and we find ourselves actually globally in this moment with you in very, very real ways, terrifying ways actually, and to just say that I'm feeling it with you. I'm not in the crux and the heart of what you are, and of course I'm not feeling exactly what you're feeling, but I am feeling what's happening. And the last 3-4 months now have been felt like just the world turned over and normal life got put on the back burner, put on hold. And I feel it very much in my nervous system, the lack of sleep, and I've been tracking very closely what's happening on all fronts, including what's happening in the government of the US and their responses, which I feel aren't helping. And of course, the UK, the old warmonger, the old colonial power that raises its hackles, jumps in, and in ways again aren't helpful. And so these huge powers are weaponizing the profound levels of trauma that are circulating and ancestral, and unleashing, I think, with a fascist, pretty much theocratic, fascistic anyway, far-right government that you were all trying to stop last year, through the whole year, pretty much on the streets. And knowing the results would be horrific if they took power, and now we're in those results. And this knowing that this is a global fight, actually, the far sweep of it's extraordinary to see a fascistic government winning in the Netherlands, in Sweden,
כן, ממי.
and
כן, בסדר.
actually in
Okay.
more subtle ways, but effectively also in Britain, where there's been an undoing of democratic rights on many fronts, the overturning of them. So this is a global phenomena, and in many ways, what's happening in Gaza is like a focal point, I think, of a bigger story. So I just wanted to put a few brush strokes for that bigger story, a sort of race to the bottom, really, as we live on a planet of diminishing resources. And certainly the territories that you are in are high desert with limited water supply, with limited, the world fighting for the last drops, these global powers. And in that process, it feels like the way that they are deciding to do that is to crash democratic processes and to increase the use of violence to do so. Such things can only be upheld by violence. And in that, undermining and taking down all humane guidelines that are upheld, that uphold a possibility for us to find more ways forward that actually are humane, that uphold a moral impetus that has consequences legally and socially when those guidelines aren't upheld. And we see the rhetoric coming from the current government in Israel and the way that they have pitched and justify this decimation of Gaza and beyond has really done so through undoing those moral guidelines, dehumanizing. I think this way that such a war, and it threads into the Western war on the Muslim people since 9/11 in the US, the dehumanization that is central to that allows for massive crimes against humanity in horrific ways. And that also relies on the fear of the other. And so these fears of Muslims in the West, the Islamophobia, which has been extreme for decades, for a couple of decades now nearly, and actually is also very historically the racism at the core of what is upholding this fascistic sort of whiteism. Whiteism isn't just necessarily white skins, but the kind of power of the West that is upheld by a racist metaphor that plays out in so many ways. So all of these threads are being activated, and there feels a great urgency, not only in terms of what's happening in Israel and Palestine and in Gaza in particular, which has been, I don't know how much people are seeing in Israel. I know that, but often there is, from what I've heard, just a lot of recycling of 10/7 and sort of re-traumatization of that, and perhaps not really seeing on the ground what the world is seeing. I'm sure you all are, but the ways that we get blinkered in these colonial dynamics when there's a perpetuation of such mass decimation and destruction. But the destruction of life in Gaza is almost complete, and the consequences, of course, are horrific. But this is also, I just know, for example, 300 years of British colonialism around the planet, and this sort of idealization of the empire still hasn't completely broken. That spell still suffuses the country that I was brought up in. What about Brexit? All of the things I'm saying, the fear, this, which has been a complete disaster, as own fascist kind of Trojan horse, really, that was. So, all of this is an old story. It's a new story right now, and the consequences are extremely heightened as, the countries around the war that's going into Hezbollah becoming involved, and into Syria, Iraq, and so on, and the Yemenis and the Houthis and all of it. So the US, and the answer to this is we just will bomb more. We will just generate more violence. And the problem with these fascistic type governments is that they're extremely dangerous. They don't care, I don't think, really about the hostages. I think that's a bit of a fading fig leaf. I don't think they really care about the citizens, actually. They care about holding power. They care about imposing their theocracies or whatever particular social oppressive structure they want to oppose, to impose on the society. And they only have really oppression and destruction to offer. They don't know about how to create life. They don't know how to build allegiances. They don't know how to go forward. They have no plan B at this moment, I would say. And so, I feel that in the world as well. There is no plan B, actually, other than let's just have a race to the bottom as to who has the most power, who has the most weaponry to take the last resources. So this is part of this global story that we're in, and it doesn't surprise me that the fulcrum of it, the heart of it, the core of it is happening where you are in the Middle East. There's just something about the energies there. I don't know quite why, but it seems to be, and a fulcrum place that is in some ways very, very personal and devastatingly dangerous for you all, but it's also becoming and is the same for us all as well that are looking from the outside. So it's a little bit of a diagnostic, as the Buddha encouraged us in facing the Four Noble Truths, as I feel was one of the heart teachings of Ajahn Chah and my American teacher Ajahn Sumedho. Was really, it seems a simple teaching, but it's so profound to have the courage to really look, to break the spells, to break through. And we're in this massive spell. You can only be in a spell when you sign, when a people's, a citizens are caught in this spell. And after, when it breaks, there is great remorse, perhaps, great sadness, or justification endlessly, like we have for century, when did over 100 years, UK, trying to name, its own horrors that it inflicted on the world. So, there is this moment of seeing it as clearly as really as possible, seeing as deeply as we can, going right back to the Buddha when he talked about the world burning with the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion that emerge from this mind, our human mind. So this is a mind, human created problem. And because of that, there is a solution, that this mind also has this capacity, this heart, for awakening, for wisdom, for compassion. So to bring the medicine, the Dharma, for me, one of the pieces personally that I've been engaged in is to try and engage Dharma communities and Sanghas in the loss of wise leadership. We don't have a Mr. Mandela on either side in your situation, who was able to come out of prison after 27 years and lift everyone in that country. He wasn't on a revenge tour. He could have been. When Thanissara and I landed in South Africa, we were invited to teach the Dharma. It was just after the political change. The white government had been toppled. Basically, it was toppled, I think, in part because of the sanctions of the world, but also it was an economic disaster that wasn't sustainable. It was a moral disaster, and it was repugnant for everyone, ultimately. But when we arrived and were teaching and stayed in a deep rural area of Southern Africa, in the homelands of the Zulu peoples, there was an enormous amount of euphoria for the liberation, but it unleashed an enormous amount of violence. We were in a low-grade war, actually, between an inflamed situation that had been inflamed by the white government, in a way, the most violent period in the whole 50-year story of apartheid was just before apartheid fell. They actually engineered a war between the ANC of the Xhosa people and the Inkatha Freedom Party of the Zulu people. And there were when we arrived, I remember teaching a retreat, there was a massacre down the road on Christmas. And there was fear. People had enormous fear. The white people had enormous fear. And they were like holding on to their guns. And it was very, very tangible, and it wasn't without cause. There were many, many horrific murders. And many people that we knew too, in all races, experienced a lot of violence. And for me, that wasn't something I had really had familiarity with. So I had to really, I felt the fear to such an extent that at a certain point I just froze. I had this completely overwhelming fear. And of course, the fear was reinforced all the time by the narrative, particularly from the white people who were like constantly, you can't do this, you have to be careful of that. And there was this sort of, are you with us? Aren't you with us? And if you're with us, you have to see the African people like this, this, even though there was the liberation, the apartheid mindset, of course, is still being deconstructed. So we had to make a choice. How do we meet this? And we were there for 30 years, actually, on and off. We came out to bring resources for our own sanity in a highly activated trauma field. And I think it was interesting because I actually had a very powerful dream in the middle of this frozen place. And I think to not underestimate the way the unconscious speaks to us, that we're dealing not only with the surface rhetoric, the words that are being used to whip up violence on all sides, but we're also dealing with the deep unconscious where the fears and the trauma and the potential lies. Like Carl Jung himself said, that really the fears held in the unconscious when they're not processed, healed and processed and transformed and lifted to a higher vibration, that it is actually that which you just need one demagogue to tap into that collective fear and to open the gates of hell and to give permission, like we saw with Trump's America, that there are no bars, there are no checks, there are no balances, there are no consequences to unleash a sort of a demonic energy. So, this fear is very potent, and I definitely felt it. And I had moments when I could almost pass out with the level of fear as a white person in certain situations in that dynamic. And a lot of that was also part of the projection of my mind, and it was also somewhat real. And so I think at a certain point in this dream that came to me, there was a real shaman, a woman. The shamans there, they're called sangomas. They're mostly women, actually. And she came in the dream and took my hands and pulled me to a sort of off this road. And I was just held, Thanissara pulled with me, and she was looked at me, and then this milk came from her breasts into my throat. and I was choking, and she was like, relax, relax. And I just allowed that to fill me, and it started to overflow, and I realized it was healing, and it was going into Thanissara. And then she invoked, gave a sort of incantation, like in my energy system. And I woke up, and it was so strong. I actually jumped out of bed and looked for this woman. And of course, then I realized it was a dream. But I understood at that moment that I had been welcomed. We were welcomed in that space, and that whether there would be protection or not, that was a moment when I consciously brought the fear up as a practice and had to really, I could have a very brutal death in this situation. I had friends who did have. So, but I was going to trust the Dharma. I wasn't going to get a gun. I wasn't going to build a huge wall. I wasn't going to go and with that fear into the relationship with the other, that I was going to deeply trust the Dharma. And if there was something that would happen to me, it would probably be karma, and I might not be able to escape it anyway. So I might as well just get on with it and work with this. And that was a very pivotal moment for me. So, and actually in all of those years, there were moments, I never experienced actually a lot of hostility. In fact, the most problems I had were from the white community, not the black community, where the ways of, and I think this is a very deep work, the ways that one is conditioned around that fear to hold, become armored in these systems. And it's not to say there isn't real reasons for that fear, but I found, I need to wrap up, so I will, so that we can open this space. But I found the silence in the Dharma communities and the deflection around that. We're not political, we're staying neutral. I found them slightly bullshit arguments, to tell you the truth, because there is, the Buddha himself got in front of warring parties. He even tried to stop the slaughter of his own people. He knew the army coming was out to slaughter his people. He stood 3 times, and actually he couldn't stop it. He just, like, the karma was so strong, but he tried. For me, that's the issue. Whether we can stop all of it, it's so big, but we must try. And I feel so. I just started a circle, a prayer, and chanting, basically a meditation and chanting circle every day. But I did it a bit differently, that I would ask people come to do an action, write to a senator, write to, do something, educate yourself at least. So that it became an education, tracking what was happening, standing up, supporting. And now, yesterday, I was just talking with a very dear Sangha friend about holding spaces for the generation of particularly Jewish practitioners in the Insight movement that are really overwhelmed by the nature of what's happening, can't understand perhaps, or grapple with how citizens of Israel have been hijacked by this lawless government, and the reaction, the extremity of the reaction, and a feeling unhinged, they can't find. So we're looking at holding a space, a listening circle. So I think on many, many levels, from holding a listening circle to bringing our therapeutic healing skills, to bringing the medicine of the Dharma, to actually finding that moral voice, like Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhu Bodhi wrote on Facebook, and he really went for the jugular, went for the throat, for the practitioners. What is all this talk of awakening when we're looking at this decimation happening in Israel and Palestine? You just talk it and then go back to sleep? Or he just was very, very challenging in a great way, I felt. So then from the circle that we led for a month, that emerged I think Asaf, you came the other day. I asked, together with a working group, 8 of us, we asked 8 speakers. Soha Levi, who you might know from one of your teachers, who was in the West Bank helping with Olive, and her partner Nathan, Bhikkhu Bodhi, Reverend Kriti Kanko, who's a climate activist, Indian, Sharad Charai, who's also Indian, South African in Berkeley, Maya Marie, who is now running with her partner and a team, the project in South Africa, the meditation center, who is an indigenous worker calling in the ancestors, and Sumeda and Sarah Shapuri, who's Iranian American, who gave a really powerful statement, and challenging the Dharma centers to kind of get going and wake up. And who else? I'm sure I'm missing important. Yong O, Dharma teacher, Sister Santacita, who grew up in Austria and talked about the burden of ancestral Nazism in her lineage, in the culture. I don't know if it's in her personal lineage or culture, but of course the birthplace of Hitler himself, a huge archetypal kind of impact that goes through generations. So what I feel is that this isn't something we can be alone on for sure, but I do feel there's a lot of what will happen, like the Buddha, whether we can stop. I feel it really, the Dharma is the way of nonviolence. The Dharma is holding a moral voice, a lamp for nonviolence. I think the precedent of the Buddha himself, not necessarily the lineages of the Dharma, they're not very activist shaped for various reasons, which is another conversation. But I take heart from the Buddha standing in front of that army, trying to stop, and actually standing between other armies to negotiate peace and calling them out, that we have a voice, we have a power as Dharma practitioners. We can bring that out, and we can do it in skillful ways, and we can do it being completely, radically, authentically true to what needs to be said, as the Buddha was, but we can also do it from a way that holds compassion. I believe there is middle ways. We don't necessarily know them. We don't know, like people now where you are going, we need to do this, we need to do that. I don't think we know what we need to do. I think we just need to stop, need a complete ceasefire, like when the Buddha went to Angulimala, the serial killer, and Angulimala said, I'm going to take this person out. Sorry. I'm going to, take the Buddha out. He was a terrifying, and he couldn't catch the Buddha. The Buddha was just walking, and he screamed, stop. And the Buddha turned and said, I have stopped. When will you stop? So I think this is a moment where what we do know is just stop. That none of these Western governments piling in, this current Israeli government, Hamas, all of it, it's like stop, just stop and pause. The answer's not going to come from the same consciousness that created this mess. And as Dhamma practitioners, we're bringing a different consciousness. So we are the ones, and anyone else in any other world that they're in, that can raise this consciousness, that can speak out to call for, to demand another path. We may not succeed, but we must try. So those are my, sorry, that was longer than I meant to be, giving a few words. So over to you, Asaf. Sorry, I went quiet. Please do call me out anytime about anything.
First of all, thank you. When we speak, I feel I never really understand where you're heading and how you manage, because I feel you talked now in 3 different scales. So you started in a very political, very wide political understanding, moved into a very personal, and then in a way like metaphysic realm, talking about the unconscious. So I feel it's very, very wide. It's usually, my feeling, it's usually not how we perceive Dharma. At least the Dharma is that I'm usually being taught is more of the personal Dharma in a way. It has a certain way of developing the mind and developing morality and wisdom, but it has like limits to it. And I find, for me, when I invited you to speak, is because I do find you see intuitively, in a way, you see Dharma in a different way. So I saw when you were speaking, how do I respond when you talk about politics? What I say, this is politics. Kind of, I'm not sure if this part of what we're supposed to speak about. Okay? Like, does politics have a place in the Dharma? Or does the metaphysics have a place in the Dharma? And so I really would like to ask you, how do you understand the Dharma that makes you engaged in politics, engaged in what is happening in politics in a very, I'm not sure it's the right word, but kind of understanding, like talking about countries and events in the world, it's a different Dharma than what we study in retreats, I would say. So what makes you be engaged in that kind of understanding and working in that way? What's your understanding of the Dharma in a way?
Well, I think first of all, I like to try and meet people as a human being. I am not necessarily always in the mantle of what is understood as what a Dharma teacher is meant to be. And I realize in doing that, I break certain molds. I try and reference back to my own teachers and how they engaged in various moments and situations. Like Master Xunhua from the Chinese lineage, from whom we learned the Kuan Yin Dharmas, when there was a nuclear threat at a certain point here from Cuba, when the Cold War, and he talked about it and called for a fast, that people fast, that his disciples fast, that they take on extra practices. And yeah, it's not usual. And I think what I'm partly doing is, I also know that the Buddha advised generals, not necessarily at all in war strategy, but in other strategies, other ways. He was himself, as he grew up, born of a political family. So he would have been very conscious of politics. He certainly didn't say politics was the means that he was using for liberation. It's a power system that is very problematic, but it is one that is actually shaping this circumstance. So I think it is a challenge for us in the Dharma to stay with Dharma principles, like the principle of nonviolence, but to actually find ways of speaking and to find that voice to promote a moral response. I feel that this transmission in many ways of the Dharma into the West, and I'm meaning Israel as well. I'm just talking about the sort of contemporary way that we understand the Dharma has focalized itself around meditation retreats, primarily silent meditation retreats, Sangha building. And in that way, there's not really a fuller experience of how the Dharma is held as part of everyday life, that I found in some of the Asian spaces that I practiced in, and how conversations would be reflecting on what was happening and, what is our response. But also, it's not necessarily always that one has to have the precedent of what's gone before. To meet this times that we're in now, of such great danger for the whole world in terms of the environmental collapse, the warming of the planet. These are the two major that threaten all existence. We don't really have a map, actually, for this moment. We have to find how to speak to it. And personally, not everyone agrees with me. But though I do notice, I do get invited to speak in these moments because I'm willing to speak to the human side and the political side while trying to ground it and not taking sides in the political side, but just trying to give, I guess calling for a ceasefire is taking a side, but it's taking a side with nonviolence. But I find that we're having to explore how to apply the medicine of the Dharma in a very different context that the Buddha was in, and a very different context than just the meditation retreats. And so I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but I'm inviting, and we're inviting those in the Sangha around me into a conversation where we can speak about these things and hold that in a space that is protected and safe. Like the event that we did the other day online when we had our speakers, because it's such, we had nearly 600 people sign up for that. So obviously there is a need to speak to what was happening, and not just, as many centers were like, we're not speaking about this. There's a need because people are hurting, and there's a need because people and all of us want to hear, naming what's happening as well. And sometimes that does veer into naming the bigger picture. For example, I was talking about the global crisis in the search for, that's fueling a lot of these wars. Like in Syria, one of the sparks for what happened in Syria, the decimation of Syria, was an extraordinary drought where, something like 60% of their cattle died, and there's lost a huge amount of arable land. And people were marching into the capital, and there was this reaction. So in a certain way, yes, Gaza is a historical, complex dynamic, but it's also a climate war. It is a particular way of the severity of the violence, as we saw in Syria, as we saw in the plunder of Iraq by the Americans. So I'm not, I don't know this way of speaking. I'm not trying to say it's right or wrong, but it's what I feel moved to express, and then try to always bring back to what we can do in the Dharma. How we can use our voice in the Dharma to speak out, to protect living beings, to create as a safe spaces for these kinds of conversations. So we can hear each other. And there are ways of doing that. Like the other day, we didn't have a chat on, we weren't having people speak live. We were just like, there's just this presentation of 8 people speaking, reflecting. And people were really, really grateful. Everyone was really, really grateful. It was hard, I think, for some people. It was hard for us. But I think, this is the courage that we need to find a way to name things and to keep bringing it back to the way of the Dharma, which allows a path forward. It doesn't guarantee success, but it gives a path. It does give a path, a way to engage.
So if anybody has any question, you can write it on the chat. And Ilan, do you have something you would like to comment or reflect or ask Thanissara?
Uh, yes, as you rightly said, Thanissara, we were, how shall we say, brought up thinking or reading Dharma mostly as as a personal practice of meditation, and as you rightly mentioned, I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, if I'm correct, I'm not so sure, that the real practice begins when you get off the cushion and not when you sit down. So we are facing here, because I want to bring it into our current situation. We're facing here with this big questions of can Dharma be a real refuge at this time? And I quoted, for instance, you talked about the commitment to non-violence, okay, as being being a core essence of Dharma. And yet, as I quoted at the beginning, Bhikkhu Bali, when you really want to find this tenet of Dharma, practical, the term, non-violence, the terminology itself becomes very complicated, in terms of self-defense, in terms of really how do you approach violence? Where do you draw the limits? Because the borders are also become transparent. Where do you draw the line? And these are concrete questions that people face, here, and I'm not sure we have answers. So especially for Dharma practitioners, I think it's a huge challenge, and people in different circles are confused, being torn apart, between all this sense of not being protected, of not knowing how things will evolve. It becomes existential question for people, and it's very challenging. It is very challenging to, even if you take this precept, this tenet, more than precept, of non-violence. I think there are many stories, from the Buddha's times, relating to the question of violence. What I would like to hear your thoughts about this conflicting currents that we find ourselves almost torn apart.
Yes, different thoughts going through my mind. I mean, certainly in the Buddha's day, he didn't advocate for the various tribes that around him not to have their armies. As I say, he would advise generals and so on. He took a stance, but in looking at dependent origination, we look at it personally, the causes of what brings suffering, and then the unhooking, the breaking the chain of suffering. You can also apply it systemically. And this is what we need to do. This is, I think, the movement that I've been asked about, is we need to apply the Dharma to the systems that we're in, because the systems that we're in and that we've all been, brought up in, are actually have been and are continue to be inherently violent. They're colonially based systems, generally speaking, and that's a planetary phenomena, whether one has been colonizing or colonized. There's different places that we're on different squares on that chessboard, but the world is very profoundly shaped by that. And so there's something about the levels of violence in this particular expression of violence that has no checks or balances, that has, including from the funding from the US, there is no accountability delivered with that. And that impacts, that's going to impact the election in America. So these are very real impacts. And, if we have enough fascism, it's going to impact whether we can even have these spaces to practice Dharma, because the Dharma is really predicated upon being able to have pretty liberal social spaces, political spaces. So we can't remove ourselves from this causality and chain and effect in the systems that are actually sustaining the privileges that we have. So I think it's a very difficult one, because one's locked in from this place of fear. If we don't do this violence, then we will be wiped out. And that was very much how the whites felt historically in Africa. That really was the core energy that kept that system going, was fear, really. And unfortunately, we had in the end some pretty amazingly conscious leaders, with Mr. Mandela and Desmond Tutu and all the rest, the struggle heroes, etc. We don't have that. I don't think we even have that on the world stage anymore, really. We have a lack of wise leadership. And this is a real, it's a real shame. It's really dangerous for the world. So we as citizens have to somehow be that voice of wisdom. We have to be that moderating effect. Yes, it's not really, it's like the first precept of not taking life. It's, if you notice the actual wording of it, it's saying we're taking a training to move towards complete harmlessness. Now, we know that that will be any of the precepts. We are in gray areas all the time. Everything we might eat maybe is is connected with some violence somewhere. If you're eating meat, if you're eating, drinking milk or whatever, if I put flea powder on my dog. So, we're in these gray areas all the time. But what we want to do morally is to guide the systems we're in and the internal psychological structure that we need to have, that upon which you can't base a Dharma practice unless you have an ethic, unless you have a moral inside. You won't go very far. So it's an internal structure, the systems we want to guide to the least harm, the least harm, and to find alternative ways. The only way that's being offered right now, backed by the power of the West on the whole, is massive violence. And it's to the point that it's actually, the world is up in arms. And it's not up in arms, up in horror, calling for this to stop. So I think that it's not to be saying there is no boundary, there is no a place where you hold that boundary. To have to act out of violence is karma, and it's a collective karma. So it means there will be an effect. And to think that we're going to become to peace and safety by generating massive violence is not very smart, because it's going to cycle back. The Hydra head will grow another head. You can't stop it like that. And it just shows how unevolved we are as humans, really, that we have to feel, and how deeply driven we are by these unconscious patterns. So it's this is, I think, I do want to take it to the global level, because I feel we're in a global curriculum that is so profound, that is calling us to really explore the assumptions we have made for generations of this is the only way we can do this, and the Buddha came to that moment before his enlightenment where he tried every path, the path of pleasure, the path of pain, and he nearly died. He nearly, through pain. He was at the moment of dying when Sujata came with the milk rice. It's like a deep metaphor of compassion, of the earth itself, of nourishment, of beauty, like, live, and offered that he could have the strength to then forget all the old ways. He said, this is basically useless, what I've been doing. And then in that, maybe we have to listen into the Dharma. Ajahn Chah called it the living Dharma, not just the textbooks. It's speaking intuitive wisdom. That's what it is, to find that way. I believe there is that way. So the Buddha's question was, might there be another way? He didn't know what it was yet. It wasn't there yet. And that's where we are as a globe. It's like, is the only way massive violence? Is this the only way we're going to uphold these systems we've been in? Or might there be another way? And how can we contribute to unpicking the causes of violence and offer something else? So I feel this is our task. It's not to be naive, to say, oh, there's no boundary, there's no force pushing, no, that's not naive. There's karma in violence, so it means it will come back in some way. But we can, and we should, and that's what the precept training is, work to lessen the harm, personally, collectively. So, and the Buddha did that in the collective. He just didn't do it on his seat. He went out into the society and did it. But I really feel for the particular predicament and how impossible it seems. But Mr. Mandela said it seems impossible until it's done. You're behind the wall. You've been there. And as I said, with apartheid, in South Africa, it got more violent before that wall fell. It's like, and this system, the global, it's like, it's oppressing, and it's, and so personally, I think we can resist that level of violence. Say, no, this is not humane. This is not what we subscribe to. I mean, I see that people are out on the streets basically saying that right now in Tel Aviv. So clearly there's a point where it's like, no, like that, stop, we just stop.
I would like to ask you a question maybe about that, because you were talking about the lack of leaders, spiritual, it's worldly leaders, but maybe also spiritual leaders. Yesterday I was on my way to a demonstration in Tel Aviv, and I was listening to Martin Luther King, and actually fascinated by him, because he was a reverend, right? He was
Yes.
so he was actually both a spiritual leader and a political leader. And when you hear him speak, you hear he actually speaks the language of love when he speaks. He uses that word when he speaks. And he uses that word when he talks about very difficult political issues, talking about the war in Vietnam, talking about the situation of the Afro-Americans in the US. And I think when you mentioned Nelson Mandela, who's also quite a spiritual human being, and the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and maybe the question is, I feel they have a spark within them. So they have something very deeply spiritual, which goes beyond just this world, but they bring it into this world. And that brings a huge change on humanity, and not just for their time. It brings a huge change for humanity for generations. I mean, just our contemplation of the Buddha, which is said to be 2,500 years ago, what does it bring to this day? So you have something to say about what you feel about this place of spirituality in connection to making a difference in this world, or how to connect to that place? Because I feel it within you. Maybe this is why I asked.
Well, I feel like such an infant in the light of Mr. Mandela and so on. I kind of feel they're like people. I mean, we look at them as people of the past, but I kind of feel they're like people of the future. They're showing what we can be. They're showing that way the power of spirit. The power of spirit has to hold for the oneness of everything. It has to hold for that truth of where we actually are of the same essence ultimately, whatever shape and package we come in, and that the discriminating mind and all that emerges from that separating out consciousness, mano vijnana, the mind that creates self and other, and all that happens in between, that is a place of a lack of unity, a lack of really understanding at the depth of the ocean, if you like. On the surface, there's the waves of differences, and at the depth, it's the same water. It's all the same water. So I think they know that very deeply, and as Dharma practitioners, we can know that deeply. I think the challenge we're looking at is applying that to the surface, and in the collective. And these are the people that did that, and they did that after Mr. Mandela didn't. 27 years in prison they turned it into a university on Robben Island. They knew they knew eventually they would be in leadership roles. But he also talked about how he meditated a lot, and actually he missed that space once he left. But he also had it innate. I mean, he was from a regal lineage, actually, a Xhosa lineage, and so you could feel that in his the way he carried himself. He was also very human and very funny. So he was a very integrated person, I think, that really demonstrates how the spirit can really uplift and speak through, like you're saying, Dr. Martin Luther King, who was actually very fierce too. He called for justice as well, and called out. But he also did it in a way. I mean, basically he got shot too. So obviously someone didn't like what he was saying, and now he's highly revered. But as you say, his message lives on. His message lives on, and his energy and his spirit lives on in a way that people still hold with great reverence, as does Mr. Mandela and so many others, and that really show us a way forward, how we can fuse this concern and compassion for the world, and express that by knowing it, like really getting to know the landscapes, and then finding that way that we can offer a different way, some solace, some clarity, some medicine of healing. So yeah, I take great heart, Mr. Mandela. There was one of the people that was on his security detail used to come to meditate with us at Dharmagiri in South Africa. He'd come with his army fatigues and his guns, and we'd say, could you leave your guns outside? And, you know, he was really interested in meditation, but he told us a story about Mr. Mandela. As I said, when we were first there, we were in a low-grade war zone that would flare up, and these violent incidents. And the town very near us was not an ANC town. It wasn't in the party of Mr. Mandela. And there were a lot of warlords there, and there'd been a lot of cross-fighting. And he wanted to go to this town to try and calm it down. And this person that came to meditate in the Dhamagiri at our place, he was in the car with him as part of his security. He's a white guy. Mr. Mandela deliberately chose people as his attendants and supporters that were not necessarily African, were mixed race, and many white people and Afrikaans, as a demonstration of how he wanted the country to reflect a multi-racial society. So anyhow, they're in this car, they go to this town, and they're in his driving in, and the streets are lined, and Mr. Mandela says, I'd like to get out and walk down the street to greet the people. And the guys in the car, the security says, you cannot do that. Mr. Mandela, if you will be shot, you know, if you get out this car. And he said, after everything I've been through, if I can't walk down the street in my own country to greet people, then you might as well shoot me now. So in fact, he got out of the car and he walked, and he has this way, I've seen him, been in his presence about 4 times in various things. He has this sort of, it's not just what he says, but he's embodied. And I'm sure it's not what just Dr. Martin Luther King says. This is a deep embodiment of this spiritual presence that actually calmed the people as he was walking, and they, you know, they just couldn't not help but love him. So I do feel that this sort of fearlessness, you know, is one of the attributes, one of the fruits, if you like, of the Dharma. The Buddha demonstrated it. Some of these great heroes that we're talking about, there was a courage. And, you know, when my teacher, Ajahn Chah, great meditation master of Northeast Thailand, who was really impactful in my life, mostly by his presence, because I couldn't really understand what he was saying in Thai. But he, you know, when he was asked, how did he get to be, I mean, he had like 100 monasteries under him. He was so dynamic as a teacher. How did he get to be how he was? He just said, I dared to do, I dared, I did. I took courage, basically. I took the courage. So I think the Dharma and these examples and these kinds of beings, we're so lucky we have them. I don't see many on the world stage like that now, but maybe collectively we can be like that we can have the courage, we can walk with less, even though we feel the fear, not to be shaped by that fear. We can hold a light, we can speak a different language. Then there's only one way and there's no choice. And hopefully we can do that. And hopefully, I am absolutely sure it will have an important effect.
I feel it's like a prayer.
Yes. Well, I pray a lot. I not too, you know, not maybe in the old way that we understood that. Although I do, there is, you know, the Dharma practice of invoking, protection. The Buddha taught the protection chants to be done in places that aren't safe, of places of great difficulty. And that is like a prayer. So I do those chants and hold a prayer for us all at this time and call, I think that's the work of consciousness. That's a deep Dharma work. That's the work of compassion that we hold that compassion, if you like, for it all in our meditation. In the daily world, we might not feel it, and we're very activated, but we can still find quiet moments where we can still hold prayer for peace, the highest that we can offer, or that we might, as humanity, find this higher path together. It feels impossible, but then I like to think of Mr. Mandela. Apartheid looked like it would never, ever fail. You know, it was a very, very entrenched system. And then one day it fell. And everyone working to hold that light for a different way helped it fall. And, you know, it's not without violence. It's a very violent country. It's a very difficult country. It's a very traumatized space. But, you know, it's better than what it was. It's hopeful. It's hopeful. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of people working together. You know, tremendous potential that gets unleashed once these structures that hold everything down in fear and violence are undone. So I do pray for that, for all the peoples caught in this really terrible situation, and for the world at this time. And for you all and Tovana, I thank you so much for even being open to considering and deepening and exploring how to apply the Dharma. And that's so important and such a beautiful offering as well. And thank you, Asaf.
Thank you. So it's already 9 o'clock. Ilan, do you have like a
I wanted to suggest if it's possible for you, if you care, you know, Thanissara, maybe we could end with with a chant, you know, end this sitting with a chant, if you can guide us. I think it would, for me, you know, I speak for.
I just invoke the Buddha and the refuges, and it's pretty simple. And join in. Maybe you have to be on mute if you're joining in, so it'd be a bit of a cacophony. So to invoke all the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, the Dharma protectors, to be present, this great stream of awakening, all the heroes that found another path, may be present for us at this time, present with you, present for the lands of Israel, for the Palestinians in Palestine, for all the ancestors who knew this land as a holy space, even before the people to earth. May we call on the spirit of earth and nature to also be present, to bring peace, to bring healing, to bring another way. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dudiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatyampi buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Bhavantu sabba mangalan, rakantu sabba devata, sabba buddha nubhavena sati soti bhavantu te. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Thanissara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So maybe one last thing is that I think it's a bit my bad, but I forgot to say something about Dana, and I forgot. How do you like to offer us offer you Dana?
Well,
Anyway.
thank you so much. I would like for any dana from this session that you would like to offer to go to whatever you feel will help support the movement towards peace for you all. And to keep collecting dana for that. Whatever you feel will bring that and support whatever organizations you feel help be a voice for you all. And you know, for the peace in the region, that and just to know that we're here, and it'd be lovely to connect more with our Sangha, with your Sangha. We are definitely very, very close to what's happening. We're tracking it, we're feeling it. We're so sorry. I'm so heartbroken for you all. And we will do everything we can in harmony with the Dharma to alleviate the suffering and to find a better way. And yeah, let's just keep doing what we can, keep holding the prayer, to keep doing our practice. I believe it all helps to shift at an energetic level and heighten the frequency of love. And this is something that has a power. The Buddha said it has a power. I believe that. And yeah, hope to see you soon in person. Hope we can more happier days come and visit again and see you all. Thanissara and I so deeply love you all, so deeply miss you all, and look forward to our return. You know, as my Irish granny would say, God willing. So go well.
Thank you. Bye.
Know that there is a continuation to this meeting, and next week we will meet Tara Brach almost at the same time next Sunday. So all are welcome.
I think Tara will offer a lot of really healing medicine and will perhaps be less in the way that I come across, but beautiful commentary. We worked together last year. We actually worked together on this interface, ran a platform with Conda Mason called Mind Our Democracy, calling the vote out. We were also terrified what was happening in America too. And we managed to find that middle way, you know, and got a huge amount of support for that. So from the Dharma community and criticism, but we so did the Buddha, you know, he got credit. We all, you know, praise and blame, happiness, unhappiness, the winds of the world. I think we might not, you know, but we try to find a way. We don't know it exactly. And the way will, as we try, the Dharma will come to support us. I believe that. I call on all protections, you know, like in South Africa, I'm kind of, my head is on the altar of Dharma. That is my protection. And let's just hope it works. Works so far, but you know, who knows? Yeah. Well, anyway, all prayers, much love, and
Thank you so much, Thanissara.
Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Ilan, Thanissara, Nimrod,
Thank you.
everybody.
bye. Much love. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Thanissara. Bye.
תודה.
תודה.
nimrod, אתה יכול לסגור את ההקלטה?